Nostalgia is a funny thing because it can really make you see things in a radically different way than it actually happened. There's a section of people who, including myself, grew up in the 90s and have so many vivid memories about that time period. Social media tends to fill us with constant reminders of the 90s. Everything from malls to the dollar menu at McDonald's, the slowness of the internet and all its limitations. Take a look at horror, for instance. As the 80s closed out, we had a run of some of the most famous slashers and movie monsters in history, from Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, and Chucky.
Did you fuck with me?
But as the 90s went on, they ran their course, and if you were a young kid, you really weren't allowed to watch these movies, unless your parents completely ignored the ratings at the rental store, which to be fair happened more often than not, or catching up with an older sibling or cousin, but beyond that, it wasn't easy. But that's not to say there wasn't any horror for kids out there. The 90s was the prime of my childhood. I caught some horror movies here and there, but for me, horror found its way in other ways. From Scooby-Doo reruns, catching Ghostbusters on cable during the Halloween season, and more. You had some now classic family-friendly movies like Hocus Pocus, and TV shows that really had some dark themes in it like Gargoyles and Batman the Animated Series. In what will inevitably be part 1 of a topic I want to come back to, let's talk about some of the awesome 90s horror that was made for kids, but had great storytelling, with some maybe not so horrific scenes, but definitely a creepy vibe. At times, it made you second guess things that you thought you knew, and wonder if you should have been watching it at all. When telling a 90s horror story to kids, there are some rules you have to follow. 1. Kids can't die. They can be dead already, but you can't kill them in the show. 2nd, no excessive violence, or super gory or graphic stuff. You could imply it happened if done correctly. And thirdly, for the most part, there always had to be a happy ending, or at least there had to be a lesson learned. That being said, let's dive into 90s horror for kids. Submitted for your approval, this is a tale of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Are You Afraid of the Dark was a kids series that aired on Nickelodeon in the 90s on their Saturday night kids block, a program called Snick, which has some other shows you may remember like Clarissa Explains It All That, Ren and Stimpy, and some other random shows that were good for the time, but definitely didn't catch my eye like Are You Afraid of the Dark? This show was an anthology series, which basically meant that every episode was its own self-contained story with an overall theme. In general though, it was geared to the horror side of things, with darker themes and twists, with limitations since it was still a kids show. The show itself was largely influenced by other anthology series like The Twilight Zone and Tales from the Crypt, to the extent that they added their own wraparound. A wraparound is a segment or scene that is shown in between shows or movies. In The Twilight Zone I mentioned earlier, Rod Serling will introduce you to that week's twisted story.
On The Twilight Zone next comes more exciting work from the typewriter of Richard Matheson. Our show is called Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
Gary, talk about being number 1 with a bullet.
Or in the case of Tales from the Crypt, you had the Crypt Keeper. For Are You Afraid of the Dark, you had the Midnight Society, a group of teens meeting at midnight at an undisclosed location in the wood, and they share a story over a campfire. Every week a different person would tell a story, providing an introduction to the viewer on that theme for that week, and providing the closing after the story has ended. But the best part about it was the sheer story variety. I mean, there were some bad episodes, but they touched on everything from possessions, vampires, time travel, to some really creepy stuff like Tale of the Ghastly Grinner. A creepy comic book villain that left an impact for sure. The show went on for 10 seasons, with 5 in the original run that ended in 1996, and then the 2 that came after that aired from 1999 to 2000, ending with the current revival that started in 2019 and so far has finished up in 2022. In terms of kids horror, Are You Afraid of the Dark ranks up there with some of the best, and as of this video I believe you can see all those seasons on streaming platforms. And so,
I declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed. Until next time, pleasant dreams, everyone.
Stay close. I know. Do exactly as I say. Get ready. Ready? Get her!
The Ghostbusters franchise as a whole has had its ups and downs over the years. In terms of releases, starting with the first movie in 1984, the franchise up to the early 90s had 2 live-action movies and the Real Ghostbusters animated series that ended in October of 1991. That meant really for a lot of kids, unless you saw reruns or rented the movie, you didn't have access to Ghostbusters in general. That was until 1997 when the Ghostbusters came back with a new team and some new terrifying tales. The Extreme Ghostbusters is the direct follow-up to the Real Ghostbusters animated series, set years later where the original team retired and Egon is now a university professor. It's been a while since any major paranormal event has happened in the city. That is, until Akira, the demon, begins to terrorize New York, forcing Egon to recruit his college class as a new Ghostbusters team, made up of Roland, a student studying to be a doctor, but is mechanically gifted, which is why he and Egon are the ones who primarily work on the equipment. Eduardo, a laid-back guy, a little clueless at times, but he's reliable and does his best to take care of the team, often putting his life at risk. Then you had the brash, thrill-seeking, and fan-favorite Ghostbuster Garrett, whose fearless attitude often finds him rushing into the front lines while enjoying a friendly rivalry with Eduardo. And then you have Kylie, voiced by the legendary Tara Strong. Kylie is the team's main researcher, aside from Egon, having a background in various different areas of the paranormal and the occult that help her in her role. Now honestly, I think this series is criminally underrated even by its own fandom. This show takes the core of what the Ghostbusters concept was supposed to be and really pushes that idea of everyday people working blue-collar jobs, coming from vastly different backgrounds. Plus, they really expanded on the lore by diving into new themes and having a more modern kind of horror take on the show. Some of these episodes have references to the Real Ghostbusters, like the sequel episode Grundlesque, which follows the story of the Grundle. The Grundle is a ghost that first appeared in the Real Ghostbusters animated series.
You want to be friends, yes?
The Grundle's one goal is to make others like himself, and he does this by grooming children, slowly manipulating them, their behavior getting worse and worse until they transform into a Grundle themselves. In the Real Ghostbusters episode, they call him at the end, and in doing so, all the victims were freed from the Grundle's control, except for one. In the follow-up episode in the Extreme Ghostbusters, it was discovered that the Grundle took one child and put them in a cocoon, growing in stasis until years later where they became the current Grundle. Aside from that, there are plenty of other horrific things with everything from hunger demons to living haunted houses, demonic clowns, vicious ancient demons, and time-traveling ghosts. And my absolute favorite episode, featuring a weird crossover parody between R.L. Stine and Hellraiser, it has his team investigate a series of kidnappings. They encounter the Vathic, led by Craniac, who are responsible for the kidnappings as well as the surgical mutilation they performed on the victims. These Vathic are creations of J.N. Klein, a parody of R.L. Stine, while the Vathic take their clear inspiration from the Cenobites in the Hellraiser series. And all this was intended for kids, and is set firmly in the horror category, which if you think about it, they worked in a lot of heavy topics. Everything from anti-Semitism to demonic possession, and even the Bermuda Triangle. Then add everything I mentioned earlier, and you have one of the most well-written pieces of kids horror from the 90s. With that said, I really only have one question for you. Who are you gonna call?
Ghostbusters, what do you want?
Hello, I'm R.L. Stine. I write the Goosebumps books.
And no list or video about kids horror in general, but especially about kids horror in the 90s, would really be complete without speaking about Goosebumps. It's really hard to explain how much of a phenomenon Goosebumps was in the mid to late 90s. It was everywhere. It was beyond being viral in a modern sense. It was in all honesty as big as Pokemon was in the 90s. And if you disagree, then you really didn't grow up in the 90s. And that's no shade, it's just the truth. If you were a kid growing up during that time, it was everywhere, and once a TV series came out, it blew up. From books, to the television show, home releases of the show, and merchandising. The merchandise. It was everywhere, from kids' meals to school supplies, special edition books, clothing, bed sheets. I begged my mom for money for the Scholastic Book Fair just to be able to buy books or bookmarks or whatever nonsense Goosebumps had released at that time. If there was one point in history where en masse, you managed to get thousands and thousands of kids to read a book, save maybe the Harry Potter series, it was because of Goosebumps. It was a big influence on a lot of kids, with many horror fans admitting that shows like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark was their gateway into the genre. The show debuted in 1995 and was filmed in Ontario, 1, because it was cheaper, and 2, because it was cheaper. The building and landscapes of the area served as a good replacement for the places in the story that were supposed to be set in the US. Are You Afraid of the Dark was still airing around the same time, and there's some misconceptions that they were copying Goosebumps, but the show came out way before that, and started right when the first Goosebumps book came out in the summer of 1992, so there wasn't really any way for the show to copy the book. Not to say that the writers of later seasons didn't take inspiration from some of the Goosebumps stories, but it wasn't a straight copy as some will have you believe. The show basically adapted the books as close as possible with some variations. Characters were cut in some stories, certain characters may have been combined together, and some scenes were adjusted to better fit the television format. Some stories were cut short to fit the time constraints, but some stories were given two-parters to fully flesh out the details in the book. Each show started with an introduction from R.L. Stine himself, which is the wraparound for this show, like the Crypt Keeper or the Midnight Society. One of the highlight episodes was the Haunted Mask, where Carly, tired of being a victim of Halloween pranks, searches for the scariest costume and comes across this creepy mask shop. When speaking to the owner, she sees a series of creepy masks that the owner refuses to sell her due to their horrific consequences.
No! Leave, please! Now! Do!
Carly, in her misguided mind, steals one of these masks and uses it for Halloween. However, as she trick-or-treats, the mask begins to take a life of its own. Throughout the night, the mask begins to change Carly. Her personality becomes more mean-spirited, and when she tries to remove the mask, she finds that the seam is gone and she is transforming into this hideous creature in both mind and body. While this story will always be my favorite, Goosebumps has some other solid episodes and reoccurring characters, one of which has seeped into pop culture. Slappy the Dummy is probably the most reoccurring character within Goosebumps, between his appearances in the books, shows, movies, and games. It's a fun idea, with Stine taking inspiration from Pinocchio, with a twist of course. He even appeared as the main villain in the reboot of the series, which went with more of an overarching plot rather than an anthology style series. So, if you're looking for some horror during the Halloween season, or any time of the year, and you need something a little more laid back and kid friendly, these three series can help you get your fix. So, I'll leave you with this. In the immortal words of R.L. Stine,
Viewers beware, you're in for a scare.
What's up guys? Make sure to catch some of my other videos on my channel for more on comics and other things that I'm interested in. It's been some time since I uploaded, but things will be more consistent going forward. I'm going to try this format and style of video for a bit with some different topics, so I hope you guys stay tuned. Let me know in the comments what you enjoyed about this video. There's plenty of kids horror I missed, which I will surely get to in a follow-up at some point, so let me know what you'd like to see get talked about. Going forward, I'll leave announcements and things for the end of the video so you guys can enjoy the actual video without any interruptions. That being said, thanks for watching. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified when the next video releases. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and if you didn't, that's okay too. That's why there's a dislike button. For now, and always, take care and have an awesome day.